Why am I even bothering with this? Putting my story out there like it's some kind of redemption. I'm Gabriella Mitchell, and for 28 years I've been running from my past. Family secrets, betrayal, and a legacy I never asked for. This is the story of how I finally stopped running. What you're about to read? It's not what you think. I had always thought I'd left my family's toxic dynamics behind. By 28, I should have been free. Free of the whispers, the judgments, the constant feeling of being second best. And yet, here I was again, stuck in my hotel room in Minneapolis, listening to the venomous voice of Janet, my stepmother, cutting through the silence. She sounded smug, as though this moment was the pinnacle of everything she'd ever wanted. "That trust fund belongs to Tiffany now," she said, her voice laced with satisfaction. "She's better than you'll ever be." The words hit me like daggers, sharp and piercing. I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady my racing heart. I felt the knot tighten in my stomach as her words replayed over and over in my head. What did she mean Tiffany was better? What was I, then? I should have felt anger, fear, or even desperation. But I didn't. Instead, there was a coldness to my reaction that surprised even me. I leaned back in my chair and answered, keeping my voice steady, though inside everything felt like it was unraveling. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my tone even. I could almost hear the disbelief on the other end of the line. Janet had expected tears, anger, something more. But there was nothing from me, just calm. "That's all you have to say?" Janet pressed, clearly disappointed. The smugness in her voice faltered. Yes, that was all I had to say. What more was there? She had stolen from me, taken what my mother left behind, but it wasn't like I didn't expect this. Not from Janet, not after everything that had happened. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to plead. I'd already fought my battles, learned the hard lessons, and now I was just waiting. Is this really how it ends? Is this the moment I finally lose everything? I thought back to my childhood. My mother had died when I was just 16. Her death had broken our family, fractured it beyond repair. But my mom had been fierce. She built a business from the ground up, and she left me something tangible, something to remember her by. That trust fund wasn't just money, it was my mother's legacy. It was her way of protecting me when she couldn't protect me anymore. And then Janet came into the picture. It happened quickly. 2 years after my mother passed, my father remarried. Janet. I was 18 at the time, caught in the whirlwind of grief, trying to hold on to anything that felt familiar. But Janet, she was different. She brought with her a 13-year-old daughter, Tiffany. And with Tiffany came a new set of expectations. In the beginning it felt like we were supposed to be one big happy family. But it wasn't long before I realized that wasn't true. Janet was always trying to get my father to see things her way, to make her daughter the center of his world. Tiffany, sweet and naive, was the golden child in her eyes. For years, I played the role of the quiet, obedient daughter, the one who had to fit into the background. Janet's favorite line, "Your mom wouldn't want you to be so selfish," was a constant refrain whenever I stood up for myself, whenever I dared to ask for anything that might take attention away from Tiffany. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way my father, lost in his grief, would ignore my accomplishments. When I graduated from college, top of my class, with a prestigious job waiting for me, my father couldn't attend. Not because of work or any other legitimate reason, but because Tiffany had a minor cold. Janet made sure that Tiffany's needs were always prioritized, always made to seem more important than mine. It hurt, but it didn't surprise me. It was always this way. "Dad, we need to talk," I said to him, sitting across from him at dinner one night, my voice thick with frustration. My father looked up at me, confusion written all over his face. "Is everything okay, Gabby?" I sighed, the words stuck in my throat. Could I tell him everything? Could I expose Janet for the manipulative person she was? Or would he brush it off like he always did? "Actually, no," I continued, feeling a tightness in my chest. "There's something you need to know." But I didn't tell him then. Not yet. I had learned the hard way that talking to him about Janet only made things worse. It always turned into a fight, with Janet accusing me of being dramatic or jealous, and my father growing increasingly distant. So I stayed silent. But today, in this hotel room with Janet's voice still echoing in my ears, I realized something. I was no longer that 16-year-old girl who had to fight for her place in the family. I had grown. I had learned, and I had prepared. This was no longer just about a trust fund or money. It was about standing up for myself, for the legacy my mother had left behind. It was about proving that I was worthy of what she had worked so hard to give me. I stood up from my chair, my heart still pounding, but there was a new sense of resolve settling within me. I wasn't going to let Janet win. Not now. Not ever. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I turned to the window and stared out at the Minneapolis skyline. The city was alive with possibility, just like my future. I had everything I needed to fight back, to take control of the situation. Tomorrow, I'd make my move. But for now, I needed to gather my strength. The calm I had showed Janet on the phone wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a strategy. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what was to come. The storm was coming, but I would be ready. The next morning, I found myself on the edge of something I had spent years avoiding: confrontation. For as long as I could remember, I had tried to sidestep conflict within my family. Janet had always known how to play her cards, how to manipulate and twist every situation until I was the one who felt like I was wrong. But something was different now. I wasn't that naive girl anymore. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on their approval, one that didn't need their validation. Still, as I boarded the plane back to Boston, a knot tightened in my chest. What would I say to my dad? Could I even look him in the eye after everything that had happened? I stared out the window, the clouds stretching out beneath me like an endless sea. There was a certain peace in the sky, a stillness that I longed to carry with me. But I knew better. Peace had been a luxury I couldn't afford for too long. And when the plane finally touched down, I was ready for the storm. I had called ahead, told my father I was coming, but I hadn't told him why. Some things, I realized, needed to be said face to face. No more avoiding the inevitable. The drive to my dad's house felt different. It felt like I was walking into a place that wasn't mine anymore, a place where I no longer belonged. But this was still the house I grew up in, still the place where I had learned the most valuable lessons of my life, even if my mother's absence loomed large over it all. As I stepped through the door, my father was sitting in his favorite chair, the one he had never given up, even after Mom passed. Janet and Tiffany were there too. Tiffany, looking much older than the 13-year-old I had grown up with, stood at the doorway. Her expression was a mix of confusion and wariness. She didn't know what was coming, and honestly, neither did I. But I knew this confrontation had to happen. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. Janet's face, which had once been so smug, faltered when she saw me. I could see the surprise in her eyes, the realization that something wasn't quite right. But she quickly masked it with her usual arrogance. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I was just telling your father how wonderful it is that Tiffany is getting settled into her new house. The wedding plans are coming along so nicely." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not yet. "Gabriella," my father said, standing up as I entered, his voice tight with concern. "I didn't expect you until later. Is everything okay?" I could feel the tension in the room, a heavy silence pressing down on me. Was everything okay? How could it be? The woman I had once called my stepmother had just stolen what was mine. Not just money, something much more important. My mother's legacy. And my father, sitting there, clueless, had never even suspected a thing. "No, Dad," I said, my voice steady but low, too calm for what I was feeling inside. "There's something you need to know." I pulled out my phone, holding it in front of him. "Yesterday Janet called me. She told me she emptied my trust fund and gave everything to Tiffany." I paused, watching as my father's face changed, his eyes flicking to Janet, then back to me. His confusion turned into concern, and then something else. Something deeper. Something I hadn't seen from him in years. What? He shook his head, as if trying to make sense of it. "Janet, what is this all about?" Janet's face had drained of color, her confident demeanor faltering. "I was just trying to help Tiffany," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. "She needs the money for her wedding, for a new house. It's only fair." I stood my ground, ignoring the sinking feeling in my stomach. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation again. "You tried to steal from me, Janet? You tried to take everything my mother left me." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Tiffany's eyes on me, her gaze a mix of confusion and disbelief. She didn't know the truth. She didn't understand what her mother had been doing all these years, and that, I realized, was the most heartbreaking part of all. You set me up?" Janet's voice shook, but her eyes burned with anger now. "You think I would do that to you, after everything I've done for you?" "No," I replied, my voice as calm as I could make it. "I didn't set you up. I protected myself just like my mother taught me. You didn't think I would be ready for this, did you?" I turned to my father, the man who had stood by Janet's side all these years, the man who had allowed his wife to destroy his relationship with me. "Every forged signature, every manipulated phone call, everything you've done is right here." I handed him the file Mr. Harrison had sent me. He took the file with shaking hands, his face pale as he read through the documents. Each page seemed to crush him more than the last. Janet's betrayal, her lies, her manipulation, they were all laid out in black and white, and then the words I had waited so long to hear. "Janet, what did you do?" His voice barely came out, the betrayal clear in his eyes. He had trusted her, loved her, and she had repaid him with this. Janet opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped, cornered by her own actions. And for the first time I saw her true colors. The woman who had always been in control, the one who made everyone believe her lies, was no longer so sure of herself. "I didn't do it for me," she whispered, her voice now full of desperation. "I did it for Tiffany. She needed it. She deserves it." Tiffany's face flushed, tears beginning to well in her eyes. But this time, there was no manipulation in her gaze. There was only confusion, pain. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to realize the extent of her mother's lies. "I'm sorry, Gabby," she said, her voice small. "I didn't know." I turned to her, my heart heavy. I didn't know if I could forgive her, not yet. But I nodded, knowing that this wasn't her fault. This was Janet's doing. She had been the architect of this entire mess. And then finally my father spoke, his voice full of hurt and resolve. "Janet, I want you out of this house, now." The finality in his words echoed through the room like a death sentence. Tiffany gasped, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Dad, you can't." "Yes, I can," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You're both leaving, tonight." Janet stood frozen for a moment, her eyes darting between me and my father, as if trying to find some way out of the mess she had created. But there was no escape. And for the first time in my life I felt a strange sense of peace. Because the battle wasn't just over. It was mine to win. The silence that followed was oppressive. I could feel the weight of years of manipulation and deceit hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. My father stood by the door, his back to me as Janet and Tiffany gathered their things. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed in the quiet room, each step louder than the last. Janet didn't say another word, but I could see the rage simmering in her eyes. She was no longer the woman who had controlled this house with her charm and false assurances. Now she was just a woman exposed, caught in the trap of her own lies. I wasn't sure if I should feel sorry for her or if I should finally take the satisfaction of seeing her face the consequences of her actions. But what I did feel was a deep sense of relief, mixed with something else. Something unexpected. I was finally free. My father, still holding the documents, turned to look at me, his face etched with guilt. "Gabriella," he said, his voice quiet. I never knew. I never saw what she was doing." The look in his eyes was hard to read. Was it shame, regret, or just the sadness of realizing the truth about the woman he had chosen to spend his life with? "I know," I said softly. "You couldn't have known. She made sure you didn't." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of the years of deception was finally starting to settle in his mind. He walked across the room and sat down on the couch, staring at the papers in his hand as if they were some kind of proof of a betrayal that he wasn't ready to accept. I sat down beside him, though the space between us felt vast. I had spent so many years angry at him for not seeing through Janet, for not protecting me when I needed him most. But now, seeing him so vulnerable, so broken by the realization of everything that had happened, I couldn't bring myself to lash out. "I should have told you earlier," I murmured, breaking the silence that hung between us, "but I needed proof. I needed you to see it for yourself. You wouldn't have believed me otherwise." He didn't look up at me. Instead, his gaze stayed on the papers. I didn't want to believe it, he admitted. I wanted to believe she was doing what was best for this family. For you. For us. But she wasn't, I said, my voice stronger now. She was doing what was best for her own agenda, and for Tiffany. You never saw it, but I did. I had to protect myself, Dad. No one else was going to. The words hung in the air for a moment, and my father finally looked at me, his expression full of hurt and apology. I failed you, I see that now. My heart tightened. There it was, the admission that I had waited so long to hear. But now that it was here, it felt like too little, too late. I had carried the burden of their broken marriage, of Janet's manipulations, for years. But maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward healing, for both of us. I know, Dad, I said quietly. I'm not angry anymore. I used to be. I used to be furious with you for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting me. But I get it now. You were lost in your own grief. You were doing the best you could. But now we both have to face the truth. He nodded again, his shoulders slumping. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to fix the mess I've made. You don't have to fix it, I said firmly. You just need to be honest with me, and we need to move forward, together. This is about us now, Dad. Not about Janet, not about Tiffany, just us. For a long moment he didn't say anything, and I didn't push him to. I just sat there, letting him process everything. My mind kept drifting back to the phone call with Janet, her voice taunting me, gloating about stealing what was rightfully mine. I could almost hear her now, see her smug expression as she thought she had won. But I had been ready. I had prepared for this moment, just as my mother would have wanted me to. She had taught me that strength wasn't just about standing tall in the face of adversity. It was about being patient, about waiting for the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, I had been prepared. I didn't need to fight Janet any longer. The battle had already been won. But now, as I looked at my father, I realized the real battle wasn't about the money, or even about Janet. It was about rebuilding our relationship, about finding our way back to each other after all these years. Dad, I said softly, my voice laced with a tenderness I hadn't felt in a long time, we have time to fix this. We have time to heal. He looked at me, his eyes brimming with emotion. I hope so, Gabriella. I really do. I stood up, crossing the room to the window. The sky outside was still gray, but the clouds were beginning to part, the first rays of sunlight breaking through. It felt like a metaphor for the moment we were in, darkness slowly giving way to light. There was a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in years I felt like we might actually be able to walk it together. I'm going to move forward with my plans, Dad, I said, turning back to face him. I'm going to keep building my business, just like Mom wanted me to. I won't let anyone take that from me, and I want you to be a part of it if you're ready. He smiled softly, the weight on his shoulders lifting just a little. I'm ready, Gabriella. I'm ready. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been broken for so long. It wasn't just about the trust fund. It was about the legacy my mother had left me. One that wasn't just built on money, but on strength, resilience, and the belief that I could do anything I set my mind to. I was ready to move forward. To honor her memory and to build something meaningful out of the ashes of the past. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. The storm had passed, but the aftermath lingered. Janet and Tiffany had left, both shaken by the revelation of Janet's deception. My father, though still trying to process everything, was slowly coming to terms with the depth of what had transpired. He was quieter now, and I found myself giving him space, allowing him to process the hurt in his own way. For so long, I had fought for his attention, for his love, but now it felt like the roles had reversed. He needed me, not as the rebellious daughter, but as someone who had walked through the storm and come out the other side. I spent the next few days in a haze of meetings and phone calls. I was still reeling from the confrontation with Janet and the way things had unfolded. But amidst the whirlwind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had shifted. I had crossed a line, not just with Janet, but with my past. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I had learned to stand up for myself, to protect what was mine, and it felt liberating, but also terrifying. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, a cup of tea in hand, staring at the family photos on the wall. My mother, my father, me, before everything changed. I ran my fingers over one of the old photographs of us, taken on a sunny afternoon at a family picnic. My mother was laughing, her arms wrapped around me, and my father's face was full of pride. It was a time when things were simple, before everything had been turned upside down by loss and deceit. I missed her. God, how I missed her. I had thought that her death had stolen so much from me, the time we could have had together, the guidance, the love. But now, looking at that photo, I realized something I hadn't truly understood before. She hadn't just left me memories in a trust fund, she had left me the tools to survive. She had taught me the importance of resilience, of standing firm even when the world around you was falling apart. You know, your mom used to say you were like a diamond. My father's voice broke through the silence, making me jump. I hadn't heard him approach. I looked up, meeting his tired eyes. What do you mean? He sat down across from me, taking a deep breath. She always said that pressure made you stronger, that you had a fire in you, Gabriella, a strength that you didn't even know you had. He smiled faintly. I didn't see it back then, but now I do. I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't know I had it either, Dad, but I think she always knew. She always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. He nodded, his eyes welling up slightly. I'm sorry, Gabriella. I never realized how much you were carrying. I never saw it. You couldn't have, I replied softly. You were grieving too. We both were. We never talked about it. We never had the chance to. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly connecting. Like we were starting to understand each other in a way we never had before. It was painful, this raw honesty, but it was also what we needed. My father had been lost in his own grief, trying to rebuild his life after my mother's death. But now, he was facing the truth of how Janet had manipulated him. And I was facing the truth of how much I had let my anger and resentment build over the years. We had both been running from the same thing. I think Mom would be proud of you, I said quietly, breaking the silence. His eyes softened. I hope so. I don't know if I've done enough to deserve that. You have, I reassured him. You've done enough. We've both done enough to get through this, and now we can move forward. There was a long pause, a peaceful kind of silence. I realized as I sat there with my father that the weight of the past had shifted. The burden was no longer on me to carry alone. We were both ready to rebuild. Not just our relationship, but our lives. I'm starting a new chapter, Dad, I said, standing up and walking toward the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. I'm going to use the trust fund to build something of my own. Mom's legacy isn't just about money, it's about what I do with it. And I want to create something that helps others, just like she did. I want to build a business that matters. He stood and joined me at the window, looking out at the city with me. You've got the drive, the business sense. Your mother would have been proud. I smiled softly. I hope I'm making her proud, even if she's not here to see it. But I think, in some way, she always knew this day would come. She knew I was capable of standing up for myself, of not letting people take what's mine. He nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. You've got it, Gabriella. You always have. It was the reassurance I needed, the final piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just carrying my mother's legacy, I was living it. I wasn't defined by the past anymore. The trust fund wasn't just a symbol of my mother's hard work, it was a stepping stone, a way for me to move forward and create something bigger than myself. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, legal paperwork, and planning. I had decided to start a consulting firm, focused on helping pharmaceutical companies streamline their operations, something that tied back to my mother's work. I was using the trust fund to finance it, making sure to honor her vision for me. And with my father's support, I felt more confident than ever in my decision. It wasn't going to be easy. It would take time, effort, and resilience, but I was ready. And so, I took the first step. It was terrifying, but it was also thrilling. For the first time in a long time, I was living on my own terms. My past had shaped me, but it would not define me anymore. The lessons I had learned from my mother, from the pain of losing her, from the betrayal of Janet, they were the foundation on which I was building my future. And no one could take that away from me. As the sun set behind the city, I felt the weight of everything, every hardship, every setback, every victory, settle into place. This was my moment, my chance, and I was going to take it. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into the work, into the idea I had been nurturing for so long but never fully realized until now. The consulting firm was no longer just a dream, it was becoming a reality. Every decision, every action I took was a direct reflection of my mother's teachings. I poured everything I had into this new venture, from the detailed business plans to the branding, to the hiring of the first team members. It felt like I was breathing life into something my mother would have been proud of. But as much as I was determined to make this work, the shadow of Janet's betrayal still lingered. My father, for his part, was slowly beginning to heal. He had thrown himself into the idea of helping me with my new business, offering his decades of experience. It wasn't just about business for him, though, it was about reconnecting. After all the years of distance between us, after the fractured relationship caused by Janet's manipulation, we were finally having honest conversations again. Conversations that felt real, grounded, and not clouded by lies. He had become my ally, my partner in this journey. It wasn't the father-daughter relationship I had always imagined, but it was one that was growing, one that I could work with. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, going over financial projections for the firm, I heard the familiar sound of my father's footsteps. He had started stopping by my office more frequently now, bringing his own perspective to the table, consulting clients with me. It was a bit of a strange dynamic, but it worked. We were both adjusting to the shift in our relationship, finding new ways to communicate. "You're doing well," he said as he entered my office, his voice calm, but filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I can tell you've thought this through." I looked up from my laptop and smiled faintly. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, Dad. Longer than you know." He nodded, sitting down across from me, his eyes thoughtful. "I know. I've seen the way you've handled everything, the strength you've shown. Your mother would have said the same thing. She would have seen it in you." I could feel a lump form in my throat. I wish she were here, to see all of this, to see that I'm finally doing what she always believed in. My father reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "She is here, Gabby, in everything you do, in the choices you make. She's still with you, even if she's not physically here. You've always had her strength." I let out a shaky breath, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. I don't know if I believe in all that spiritual stuff, but I feel it too, Dad. I do. I just don't know if I'm enough to make it all work. He gave me a reassuring smile. "You are. You've always been enough, and you don't have to do this alone." His words meant more than he could ever understand. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over me. I wasn't carrying the weight of this alone. Not anymore. But as much as I was trying to stay focused on the business, the reality of what had happened with Janet began to resurface again. The feeling of betrayal, the anger, it was all still there, lurking in the back of my mind. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding it forever. I needed to confront it head on, to put it behind me, so I could move forward without it constantly dragging me down. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, scrolling through the emails Mr. Harrison had sent me, the ones documenting everything Janet had tried to do. The forgeries, the lies, the deceit. As I read through the messages, the anger began to bubble up again. How could she do this, I thought? How could she destroy everything Mom worked for? But in the midst of all the anger, something else crept in. Something I hadn't expected. It was pity. I wasn't angry with Janet anymore. I pitied her. The woman who had spent so many years trying to tear my family apart, who had manipulated everyone around her, had ended up alone. Her plan had failed, and now she would have to live with the consequences. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The anger I had carried for so long had started to fade. It wasn't gone completely, but it was no longer the driving force behind my decisions. I realized that my mother had been right all along. Strength wasn't about holding on to that anger, it was about letting go of it when the time was right, letting go so I could move forward. The next day, I called Mr. Harrison. "I want to make sure everything is in order with the legal proceedings. I want to move forward. I'm ready to close this chapter." His voice was steady on the other end. I've already sent the necessary documentation to the courts, Gabriella. Janet's facing charges of attempted fraud and financial exploitation. The restitution she'll have to pay is significant. But I understand what you're saying. You want to put this behind you. Yes, I said, the word coming out more firmly than I expected. It's over now. I don't want to keep living in the past. It felt freeing in a way to finally say those words. The past had defined too much of my life. Now it was time to let go and build the future I deserved. As I continued to grow the business, I also began to see my own growth in other areas. I was learning to trust people again. Clients, colleagues, even myself. It wasn't always easy, but with every small success, I gained more confidence. The first few months were challenging, but we made progress. I signed my first major client, which brought in a significant amount of revenue. The firm was gaining traction in the industry, and I could feel it. Things were starting to shift, just like I had hoped they would. But the most rewarding part wasn't the success of the business. It was the bond I was rebuilding with my father. Week after week, we sat down for lunch, talked about work, about life, about everything we had lost and everything we were finding again. There were still painful moments, but they were becoming fewer and farther apart. And in the quiet moments, I often thought of my mother, of how proud she would be, not just of the success I was building, but of the person I had become in the process. I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, no longer living in the shadow of the past. It was a new beginning, and it was mine. The months that followed felt like a series of small but significant victories. With each new client, each milestone I hit with the firm, the feeling of liberation grew stronger. I was no longer defined by my family's past, by Janet's manipulation, or by my mother's absence. Instead, I was shaping my own future, one decision at a time. But even as the business thrived, there were still moments of doubt. Moments when I questioned if I was doing the right thing, or if I was really capable of carrying this legacy forward. No matter how many times I told myself I was ready, I still wrestled with the fear of failure. But those moments of doubt were becoming less frequent. With every new success, with every obstacle I overcame, I began to trust myself more. One evening, as I sat in my office, reviewing a proposal for a new client, I felt a knock on the door. My father stood there, his expression soft but determined. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, standing up and walking over to where he was standing. "What's on your mind?" He stepped into the room, his hands in his pockets, and I could tell he was deep in thought. "I've been thinking a lot about where we've come from," he began, his voice hesitant but genuine. "About everything we've been through as a family." I nodded, letting him continue. My father had always been a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was always with purpose. "I know I can't change the past," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to be a better father, and I want to help you, Gabby. I want to help you grow this business and make sure you don't carry the weight of everything on your own. I want to be there for you, like I should have been all along." I felt a lump in my throat as his words settled in. For so long I had carried the bitterness of his absence, the anger over his blindness to Janet's manipulation. But now, standing before me was a man who had finally come to terms with everything. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And for the first time in years, I felt that familiar spark of connection with him again. "I'd like that, Dad," I said softly. I think I could really use your help." He smiled, a hint of relief in his eyes. "I've been working on some new ideas for the business," he said, pulling out a folder from his bag. "I know your expertise is in consulting, but I think there's more we could be doing. Some new strategies to take things to the next level. Let me show you." As we sat together, reviewing his ideas, I realized something. For the first time in a long while, I was looking at my father not as the man who had failed me, but as an ally. He wasn't trying to take over my life or my business. He was trying to help me build it into something better. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. I felt a sense of gratitude I hadn't expected. In the following weeks, my father and I worked together on a few projects. He brought in new business contacts, people he had known for years in the industry. His experience was invaluable, and I found myself listening to his advice in ways I hadn't before. It was as if the years of tension between us were slowly starting to dissolve, replaced by something stronger: partnership. But even as I worked alongside him, I couldn't forget about the part of this journey that still needed closure: my relationship with Tiffany. She had reached out to me a few times since the fallout, but our conversations had been sparse. I wasn't sure what to expect when I saw her again, or even if I was ready for that kind of conversation. One afternoon, she emailed me, asking if we could meet for coffee. My first instinct was to decline, to avoid reopening that painful chapter. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the idea of finally putting the past behind us, of finding a way to move forward, not just with my father, but with her too. I agreed. When I met Tiffany at the small cafe downtown, I almost didn't recognize her. She was older, more mature than the young girl I had known, but her eyes, those same eyes that had always been filled with uncertainty and confusion, were still there. She had always been caught between loyalty to her mother and the knowledge that I had been treated unfairly. And now I could see it clearly. The guilt was written all over her face. "Gabriella, I don't know where to start," Tiffany said, her voice tentative as she fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never knew what Mom was doing." I stayed silent, watching her. This wasn't the angry confrontation I had anticipated. In fact, it wasn't even close. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Tiffany continued, her voice cracking, "but I need you to know that I never wanted to be a part of that. I never wanted to hurt you." I sighed, my own heart aching as I looked at her. The girl sitting across from me wasn't the one who had taken everything from me, that was Janet. Tiffany had been a victim too, manipulated by her mother, caught in a web of lies she didn't fully understand. "I know, Tiffany," I said, my voice softening. "I know you didn't ask for any of this, but the truth is it's not about forgiveness anymore. It's about moving on. And I think it's time for both of us to do that." She nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "I never realized how much pain Mom caused you. I thought you were the one with everything, the one with all the advantages, and I just wanted some of that. But now I see, I was so wrong." I reached across the table, placing my hand on hers. "We were both wrong, but we don't have to keep making the same mistakes." And in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't forgiveness that needed to happen, not in the way I had always imagined it. It was understanding, and maybe that was enough. As Tiffany left, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Our relationship could never go back to what it had been before, and that was okay, but it didn't need to. We had both been through too much to expect things to just be normal again. What mattered now was that we had reached an understanding. And as I walked back to my office, I realized something important. I had finally learned to let go of Janet's manipulation, of the resentment I had held onto for so long, and, most importantly, of the idea that I needed to fight to prove my worth. I was worthy. Not because of my family's approval, but because of the woman I had become. Now, I could focus on the future, on the business, on my relationship with my father, and on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. The path wasn't always going to be easy, but for the first time, I felt ready for whatever came next, because this time, I wasn't fighting to survive, I was fighting to thrive. The first year of my consulting firm's existence passed in a blur. The growth was steady, not explosive but consistent, which was more than I could have hoped for, given how uncertain the future had seemed only months before. Every step, every project felt like an affirmation. I was doing something meaningful, something that would make my mother proud. It was her legacy I was carrying forward, but it was also my own. And with every success, the weight of the past, of Janet's betrayal, seemed to lift just a little more. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The business had its challenges: late nights, stressful client meetings, and the constant balancing act of managing a growing team. I had always been ambitious, but now I was learning the true cost of ambition. I found myself burning the candle at both ends, trying to juggle everything. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, when the pressure to succeed felt almost suffocating. I missed the carefree days of my early 20s, when I could simply work hard without worrying about building an empire. But the reality was, I had built something that mattered. And that came with a responsibility I hadn't fully anticipated. One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing a proposal for a major client, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I hesitated before answering. We had been spending more time together, but tonight, I wasn't sure if I had the energy for one of our usual check-ins. I had been so focused on work that I felt like I was neglecting everything else. Still, I picked up the phone. "Hey Dad, what's up?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something I hadn't expected. "Gabriella, can you meet me for dinner tomorrow? I think we need to talk." I felt a tightness in my chest. "Of course, is everything okay?" He hesitated for a moment. "I think so, but it's important. We'll talk tomorrow," I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "All right, I'll see you then." The rest of the night I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept drifting back to the phone call, to the subtle shift in his tone. What did he want to talk about? Was it the business? Was something wrong? The next evening I arrived at the restaurant, a small, quiet place that my father and I used to visit when I was younger. The familiar scent of Italian food filled the air, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to be lost in the memories. My father was already seated at a corner table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked up as I approached and gave me a small smile. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice soft, almost tentative. "Of course, Dad, you know you can always talk to me." We sat down, and for a few minutes we exchanged small talk. How the business was going, how my team was growing, how I was managing everything. But I could tell there was something he wasn't saying, something weighing on him. Finally he cleared his throat, pushing aside his menu. "Gabriella, I need to apologize." The words caught me off guard. "Apologize? For what?" He looked me in the eye, his expression full of regret. "For not being there when you needed me. For not seeing what was happening with Janet. For not protecting you the way I should have. I've spent so many years thinking I could make up for my mistakes, but I see now that it's been more than just that. I've been trying to make up for the past, but I haven't been there for you in the way I should have been. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I want to be a better father. I want to be there for you now." I stared at him, my mind racing. I had spent so many years angry at him, holding on to the hurt from the past, but now, hearing him say these words, hearing the sincerity in his voice, it was as if a wall inside me was starting to crack. "You don't have to fix everything, Dad," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "We can't change what happened, but we can move forward. We can build something better now." He nodded slowly, a look of relief washing over him. "I know, I didn't want you to think I didn't care. I want to be here for you, Gabriella. I'm proud of what you've done, proud of who you've become, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. "I know, Dad. I've carried a lot of that anger for a long time, but I'm ready to let it go. We can start fresh, together." There was a long pause as we both sat there, the weight of our conversation settling between us. I could feel the tension in my chest start to ease, the years of frustration and grief slowly dissolving. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a turning point. We were finally acknowledging the past, but more importantly, we were letting it go. After a few moments, my father spoke again, his voice lighter this time. "I know I'm not great at this, but I want to be part of your success. I want to help you make this business everything you've dreamed of." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I'd like that, Dad. I could use your experience. And I think we could do something great together." The conversation turned to lighter topics, but the shift had already occurred. For the first time in years, I felt like my father and I were truly on the same team. We weren't just trying to repair the past, we were creating a new future together. Over the next few months, my father became an integral part of my firm. He helped build new relationships, offering guidance on projects and providing invaluable wisdom in ways that I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't trying to take over, he was just there when I needed him most. And in many ways, he helped me see the business in a new light, guiding it toward new opportunities I hadn't considered before. But it wasn't just the business that was growing. My relationship with my father was growing too. We had come so far from the place we had been. Distant, hurt, uncertain. Now we were building something together, not just as father and daughter, but as partners. As I watched my firm continue to flourish, I realized how much I had changed over the past year. I had learned to let go of the bitterness that had held me back. I had learned to trust, not just in my own abilities, but in the people who were willing to support me. And most importantly, I had learned that success wasn't about fighting against the past. It was about building from it, using the lessons learned to forge a new path. The future was no longer a source of fear, it was a realm of endless possibility. And as I moved forward, I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The months that followed felt like a culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had endured. The firm was thriving, the partnerships were expanding, and the relationships I had once thought were irreparably damaged, especially with my father, had taken on a new form. It wasn't perfect, but it was something better than I ever could have imagined. It was honest. It was real. I spent long hours at the office, but now it didn't feel like I was drowning in the work. It felt like I was building something of my own, not just a business, but a life. A life I had shaped from the fragments of my past. I could feel the weight of the trust my mother had placed in me, the weight of her belief that I would rise to meet the challenges, and each day I felt her presence with me, as though she were watching over my shoulder, guiding me forward. But there were moments when the past crept back in, when the ghosts of the years I had spent tangled in resentment, fear, and anger would rise up again. Sometimes when I was sitting at my desk late at night, the quiet of the office would make me reflect on how far I'd come, and on the things I still hadn't fully reconciled. One of those things, the one thing that still hung heavy on my heart, was my relationship with. Despite the progress we'd made, despite our conversation over coffee, there was a lingering distance. I had forgiven her, or at least I had told myself I had. But in my heart, I still didn't know if I truly believed it. I knew she hadn't had a choice in all of this, that she had been manipulated by her mother, but there was still a part of me that struggled with the unfairness of it all. She had been the one who had benefited from my mother's work, and I had been the one who had to fight for what was mine. The phone rang one afternoon, snapping me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and my heart skipped when I saw her name. Tiffany. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen, but I knew, deep down, this was the conversation I needed to have. I picked up the phone. "Hey Tiffany," I said, my voice careful but open. "Gabriella," her voice came through, tentative, as though she was unsure what to say next. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words. "It's fine, what's on your mind?" She paused for a moment before speaking again, as though choosing her words carefully. "I know I can't change what happened. I know I can't undo the damage Mom caused, and I can't pretend to know what it was like for you. But I want to make things right. I want to have a relationship with you. I know it won't be easy, but I'm hoping we can start over. Build something new, even if it's small." My chest tightened as I listened to her. Part of me wanted to pull away to protect myself from the possibility of getting hurt again, but another part of me, the part that had worked so hard to let go of the bitterness, knew this was the next step in moving forward. "I've thought about this a lot too," I said slowly. "It's not going to be easy, but I'm willing to try. Not for the past, but for what we can make of the future. We can start over, Tiffany. But it's going to take time." There was a pause on the other end, and when she spoke again her voice was softer, filled with a sense of relief. "Thank you. I really want that, Gabby. I really do." "I know," I said, feeling the final remnants of my old anger dissolve. "I think we both deserve that. We deserve to have peace with each other. We'll figure it out, step by step." And just like that, the weight that had lingered between us for so long began to lift. It wasn't a magical moment of sudden healing, but it was a beginning. A real one. A chance to rebuild, to take the broken pieces of our past and craft something new from them. It was the first time I truly felt that Tiffany and I could finally move beyond the manipulation of our past, beyond the pain that had defined so much of our relationship. Over the following months, Tiffany and I slowly began to reconnect. It was a slow process, gradual text messages, lunch dates, and honest conversations about our childhoods, our mistakes, and our attempts to move forward. I didn't expect it to be perfect. but it was progress. For the first time, I didn't feel burdened by the expectation of something that could never be. Meanwhile, the business was continuing to flourish. I had a team now, people who believed in the vision I had worked so hard to create, and while I wasn't yet where I wanted to be, I was closer than I had ever been. The trust fund that my mother had left me had become more than just a financial asset. It had become the foundation of something I could call my own. I was building something that reflected her wisdom, her values, her work ethic, and every day, I was learning more about what it meant to carry that legacy, not as a weight, but as a source of strength. One evening, as I sat at my desk preparing for an important presentation, I felt a shift. The noise of the world outside, the phone calls, the deadlines, the constant pressure, seemed to fade into the background. And in that moment, I realized something important. This was exactly where I was meant to be. I had built this. All of it. The business, the relationships, the personal growth. It had all come together, piece by piece. And while the past would always be a part of me, it no longer defined me. The legacy my mother had left wasn't about what she had built in terms of wealth, but about the resilience, the strength, and the wisdom she had passed down to me. As I sat there surrounded by the fruits of my labor, I knew I had come full circle. I had honored my mother's memory, rebuilt my relationship with my father, and was creating a new bond with Tiffany. The family I had once thought was broken beyond repair was slowly but surely healing. And as for me, I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving.